fine.
That's gone.
Not anymore.
Sounds like we're starting.
Everyone's ready.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom.
Wonderful to have you with us this evening. We'll start with a nigun, a yai lai lai melody. I invite you to join me in singing. Yai la la
Lai lai lai, yai la la lai 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 la lai, yai la la lai 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 lai, yai la la lai lai lai,
yai
la la lai 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 lai, yai la la lai lai lai
la la
yai la la lai 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 lai, yai la la lai lai,
yai la la
lai 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 la lai, yai la la lai 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 la lai, yai la la lai 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 la lai, yai la la lai lai lai,
la 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 la
yai la la lai 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 la lai, yai la la lai 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 la lai, yai la la lai lai, la la lai 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 lai, yai la la lai 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 la lai, yai la la lai 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 lai, yai la la lai lai. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Welcome. Welcome to those of you who are here with us in person and those who are joining us via our live stream. We are really glad to have you here celebrating Shabbat with us this evening. Tonight, synagogues all over the country, some, but I think many, and other Jewish organizations are marking what is called Repro Shabbat. It is sponsored by the National Council for Jewish Women, which is a Shabbat that brings awareness to reproductive rights, abortion access, and reproductive justice. So tonight, in our teaching slot, we will do a little bit of learning around access to abortion and reproductive justice in Judaism. For those of you who are here with us in person, I passed out a source sheet. There's no test. You don't have to study anything ahead of time. It's okay. We'll go through some of it together. And for those of you online, you will have a link to be able to access that online as well. We continue by adding a little bit of light into our world this evening with the lighting of our Shabbat candles on page 2.
I invite you to join me in singing. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu lehadlikne shel Shabbat.
We'll welcome in Shabbat, beginning with the words of Hine Matov, words that come from Psalm 133 on page 10. We welcome in each other with this song of welcome.
Hine matov u'manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matov u'manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matov u'manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matov u'manayim, shevet achim טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד.
We'll turn to page 20 as we welcome in our Sabbath queen, our Shabbat bride, with the words of Lecha Dodi.
שמור וזכור בדיבור אחד, השמיענו אל המיוחד. אדוני אחד ושמו אחד, שמו תפארת ולתהילה. שבת לכו ונלכה, כי היא מקור הברכה. מראש מקדם נסוכה, סוף מעשה במחשבה תחילה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, שלום עטרת בעלה, גם בשמחה ובצהלה, תוך אמוני עם סגולה. בואי חלה, בואי חלה, לך
On the bottom of page 21, you see that our final verse of Lecha Dodi ends with the words, "Enter in peace." We invite the Sabbath bride to enter in peace on this Shabbat. And if you turn to page 24, the words of Shalom Aleichem, we also invite these Shabbat angels who dwell with us on Shabbat to enter in peace, as well as to depart in peace as well at the end of Shabbat. So there's a lot about kind of coming and going on Shabbat. And so as we enter into this space, we enter in peace and we welcome each other in peace. We'll continue on page 24.
Shalom Aleichem. מלאכי ישרת מלאכי עליון ממלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא בואכם לשלום מלאכי השלום מלאכי עליון ממלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא ברכוני לשלום מלאכי השלום מלאכי עליון ממלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא צאתכם לשלום מלאכי השלום מלאכי עליון ממלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא שלום עליכם מלאכי השרת מלאכי עליון ממלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא יאי לי 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 יאי לי 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 לי
It's taught that the opening sections of our worship are things that we are allowed to do individually. We don't need a community to offer those words of our prayers. But as we enter into the Baruch Hu and the rest of the section of our service, we need community and we are invited into community. So before we formally enter into our prayers as one community, I invite you to take your own individual pause, your own breath, and when you're ready, we'll rise together in body or spirit as one community in prayer for the words of the Baruch Hu on page 28.
Yai lai lai, yai lai lai lai, yai lai 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 lai, yai lai 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 lai. Barechu et Adonai hamevorach. Baruch Adonai hamevorach leolam va'ed.
You may be seated. We continue on page 34, Shema Yisrael, the declaration that God is one.
Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. 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 Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad.
We'll continue on page 37. We'll read together English words of the Ve'ahavta. Love your God with every heartbeat, with every breath, with every conscious act. Keep in mind the words I command you today. Teach them to your children. Talk about them at work, whether you are tired or you are rested. Let them guide the work of your hands. Keep them in the forefront of your vision. Do not leave them at the doorway of your house or outside your gate. They are reminders to do all of my mitzvot, so that you can be holy for God. I am Adonai, your God. I led you out of Egypt to become your God. I am Adonai, your God. We turn from those words that come from our Torah to the words of Mi Chamocha, a song of celebration, hope, and freedom, page 40.
Adonai, mi kamocha nehedar b'kodesh, noratehi lo rosefele, noratehi lo rosefele. Malchutecha ra'uvanecha, bokea yam lifnei Moshe u'Miriam, ze Elianu ve'ameru, ze Elianu ve'ameru. Adonai yimloch le'olam le'olam va'ed, Adonai yimloch le'olam le'olam va'ed.
As we approach our Hashkivenu prayer, where we pray for protection and peace, we think of all those who are in need of peace this evening. There is so much heartache, there is so much pain in our world. We've experienced more mass shootings over the past week. There's unrest in Israel. There is the destruction of the earthquake in Turkey and Syria. So many reasons why we are in need of a shelter of peace, a Sukkot Shalom, to spread over us and the entire world. We'll join together on page 42.
Adonai Eloheinu l'shalom, l'shalom. Hashkiveinu, hashkiveinu, Adonai Eloheinu l'shalom, v'hamidenu shomreinu l'chaim, ufros aleinu Sukkot shlomecha, hashkiveinu, hashkiveinu, Adonai Eloheinu l'shalom, ufros aleinu Sukkot shlomecha, ufros aleinu Sukkot shlomecha. Hashkiveinu, hashkiveinu, Adonai Eloheinu l'shalom.
Please rise in body or spirit as we enter into our Amidah, our standing prayer on Shabbat, page 46.
Adonai, sefatai tiftach ufi agi tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise.
Page 48.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu ve'Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, ve'Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, ve'Elohei Leah Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor ve'Hanora El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, Ve'koneh HaKol, Ve'zocher Hasdei Avot v'Imachot, U'mevi Geula Livnei B'neihem, Lema'an Shemo Be'ahava, Melech Ozer U'Moshia U'Magen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Abraham, Ve'ezrat Sarah.
You may be seated. We turn now to page 60. We'll sing together a prayer for peace, a prayer for abundant peace. Shalom Rav, written by Cantor Ben Steinberg of blessed memory.
Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Ki atahu melech adon lechol hashalom. Ki atahu melech adon lechol hashalom. V'tov beinecha levarech et amcha Yisrael bechol et uvchol shah bishlomecha. Baruch atah Adonai hamivarech et amo Yisrael b'shalom.
We'll pause now for a moment of your own personal prayer and meditation.
Bottom of page 62. Words of peace, a prayer for peace. The words of Oseh Shalom. Oseh Shalom, Shalom bimromav, Hu yaseh Shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru amen. Oseh Shalom, Shalom bimromav, Hu yaseh Shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru amen. Hu yaseh Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Amen, amen. Oseh Shalom, Shalom bimromav, Hu yaseh Shalom aleinu, ve'al kol
We'll turn to page 253. The words of the Mishaberach, where we bestow blessing upon those who are in need of healing. Whether you're in need of healing of body, of mind, of spirit, if you're thinking of yourself or of others, we invite you to hold those people in your hearts and your minds as we offer these words of blessing together.
Shabbat Avotenu mikor habracha limotenu. May the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Yishaberach imotenu mikol habracha lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen. In just a moment, we'll begin Rabbi Daniels' teaching. I want to let you know, if you're joining us on the live stream on Facebook or YouTube, but not the website, you can expect the source sheet that Rabbi Daniels will be referencing posted in the chat via a link in just a moment.
Thank you. As I shared at the beginning of the service, congregations and Jewish organizations around the country tonight are marking this as Repro Shabbat, organized by the National Council of Jewish Women, a Shabbat that focuses on the idea of reproductive justice and considering how that fits in through a Jewish lens. So tonight, I thought it might be interesting to do a little bit of study together. Instead of me standing up here and explaining to you, I thought we could do a little bit of learning together. So, if you're in person, you should have gotten one of these source sheets. It's long, don't worry, we're not going to do it all tonight, but you'll have it to take home with you. And if you're joining us online in just a moment, there should be a link in the chat where you can access this source sheet as well, so you can join in with us. And if you would like to add comments in online, I won't be able to see them in the moment, but Kenny will see them in the moment. I won't be able to see them in the moment, but I'm happy to go back and respond later. Or you can always reach out, and I'm happy to talk to you either via email or even in person. Would be amazing. So this source sheet is not by my own making. This is made by Rabbi Danya Rettenberg. She is a colleague who actually lives in the Chicagoland area at times and also in Israel at times. I believe she's here right now, but I'm not 100% sure. She was ordained by the conservative movement, and she is, I believe, the scholar in residence right now with NCJW. And so she's doing a lot of work with them, and she's done a lot of amazing work putting together awesome resources that talk about these ideas of how Jewish text interplays with what's happening in our world today. So let's start out with a little bit of context. Repro Shabbat, sponsored by NCJW, happens tonight on this Shabbat because it's Parashat Mishpatim. This is the portion of Torah that we read on this Shabbat, which has a specific verse which is often referenced in regard to access to abortion and Jewish views on access to abortion. And so that is why it is tonight on the Shabbat where we read Parshat Mishpatim. Mishpatim means rules. So in this parsha, we get a whole long list of rules that we are meant to follow. This leads up to one of the moments of revelation on Mount Sinai of Moses and the people of Israel receiving Torah. And before that happens, there's this whole long list of rules that gets laid out. And one of those rules talks about this idea of terminating a pregnancy, miscarriage. And so we're going to look at that first text right now. So we're, if you're joining with us, at the very bottom of the page, Exodus 21, verses 22 to 25. And this is one of the first texts where we get a mention about this idea of a miscarriage and what happens in the case of a miscarriage. And as you'll see in a moment, this text kind of gets used throughout the ages by different sages when they're interpreting this text and what it means during their time. So normally, I would have one of you read this out loud, but I'm going to read it out loud. And then, if you have things that you want to respond to specifically, I would love to not just be the only one talking. But so you know, I will either have you say it out loud on the microphone so people at home can hear you, or I will repeat it back so people at home can hear us. Okay. So, Exodus 21, verse 22. When men fight, and one of them pushes a pregnant woman, and a miscarriage results, but no other damages ensue, the one responsible shall be fined according as the woman's husband may exact from him the payment to be based on reckoning. But if other damage ensues, the penalty shall be life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. So, what is this text telling us about what happens in the case of a miscarriage? If a woman is pushed and a miscarriage results, what is the punishment that is exacted? Does anyone want to get, yeah? A fine. Okay, amazing. So a fine ensues. The husband is able to collect a fine. Notice the woman does not collect a fine, the husband collects a fine. There's lots to say about that and the relationship between husband and wife and men and women. But the men were the ones who were able to kind of collect on these kinds of things at the time. So in this case, in the land of eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, that kind of practice, if the idea that a miscarriage meant that a life was taken or a life was, someone was killed, it would be an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, right? Then that person, according to Torah laws, would typically be put to death. So in this case, we know from these verses that causing a termination of a pregnancy is not in the Torah considered murder, right? So this is one of the first verses that kind of gives us a little bit of a view into our tradition's interpretation or understanding of what a pregnancy, what a termination, a miscarriage may mean, okay? So in this case, not considered murder. This results in a fine because the pregnant person is okay. Okay, so we then, in our next text, get this text from the Torah expanded upon, Okay, so Talmud essentially expands on Torah texts. So sages, the rabbis during that time period, 2nd to 5th century, let's say, there's some a range on that, are interpreting this text. So what does it mean to the rabbis in the Talmud? So it says here, in the cases of capital law, the dispute concerning such a prohibition is with regard to the issue that is the subject of the dispute between Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi and the rabbis as it is taught in a Baraita, that Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi says, with regard to that which is written, if men struggle and they hurt a pregnant woman, so here they're restating the verse from Exodus, and if there shall be a tragedy, you shall give a life for a life. The reference is to a monetary payment for the life that he took. The tragedy referenced is the unintentional killing of the mother. So again, we learn from the Talmud that here, just like in the Torah text, it's only an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a life for a life, if the life of the mother is taken. If it is in regard to the fetus, not considered life for life in that case, okay? So one of the things that Rabbi Ruttenberg pointed out in some of her notes on this text that I actually hadn't heard before, so I learned something new in studying this, is that in the Christian viewpoint of this verse from Exodus, there actually has been cited a potential mistranslation from the Greek Septuagint, that the word for, hold on, let me find it. That the word for ason, which means damage or tragedy, is translated differently in the Greek. And I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce the Greek word, but I can show it to you afterwards. But in the Greek, they translate it, instead of as a damage or tragedy, they translate it as from the image. So essentially making it seem to be about whether or not the fetus is perfectly formed rather than whether or not the pregnant person dies. So essentially the translation or potential mistranslation in the Septuagint changes the meaning of the Hebrew in the original text. So there is kind of a question as far as the Christian interpretation of this text, because it's based on potentially a translation. Maybe translations are translations for a reason, right? So to call it a mistranslation, that's potential, or there might be a reason why it was translated in such a way, right? Because of their own personal views or kind of ethics at the time. So the question is whether one pays mere damages or incurs the death penalty depends on whether a fetus, according to the Greek, is formed or sufficiently developed in terms of their gestational stage, which would warrant a harsher punishment. So the Greek translated it in such a way that maybe changed the meaning of this verse, potentially. And it says here that later on it was translated in a different way, meaning affliction. And so, again, might have a little bit of a different meaning. But it's interesting to think that maybe this translation or this mistranslation might have resulted in some of the kind of interpretations that are made today in the Christian world around their viewpoints on abortion and access to abortion, and this idea of a formed fetus, right, being a life, versus the kind of Jewish interpretation, which in this case is that a fetus is not a life until it emerges from the mother's womb. So we're going to look at that now, is to think about what is the status of a fetus. That's a big topic of conversation around abortion access in the US. A lot of the bills that have been enacted recently talk about at what stage is a person able to potentially have access to an abortion. So according to the Talmud, it says that if a person is found pregnant, until the 40th day, it is mere fluid. So Rabbi Ruttenberg makes a note here and says that today, in today's counting, that's probably 6 or 7 weeks. So it doesn't necessarily answer our question as to when life begins necessarily, but there is this idea that merely fluid, right? And then another verse, another interpretation from the Talmud, is that Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, who's the creator of the Mishnah, he holds that the fetus is considered as its mother's thigh. So it's a part of the mother's body. So again, this idea that a fetus is part of the pregnant person, right? It's not its own separate entity yet. And then we move into ending pregnancies. What did the sources say? What did Jewish texts say around ending pregnancies? So this comes from the Talmud. Again, I think it's just really interesting to note that here we are studying a text from 2nd to 5th century that's discussing issues that we are still debating and arguing about and questioning today. And I think this is just one way to look at things. So it says, if a woman is having trouble giving birth, they cut up the child in her womb and brings it forth limb by limb, because her life becomes before the life of the child. But if the greater part has come out, one may not touch it, for one may not set aside one person's life for that of another. Essentially, right, if there's an issue where potentially the pregnant person is having a challenge or is maybe in danger in giving birth, until the fetus has, or child, however you want to say it, this says child here, emerges from the womb, the woman, it can be her life takes precedent, or the adult's life takes precedence. So it says here that Rabbi David Feldman says, implicit in this Mishnah is the teaching that the rights of the fetus are secondary to the rights of the mother, all the way up until the moment of birth. So I think that's important understanding of the Jewish view on the role of the pregnant person and how their life is valued, and how Jewish sources and texts see that life. Now, we're not going to continue on in this, although I could talk about this for a long time, I think. But on the last couple pages here, we have some more modern takes, one from the 18th century, one from the 19th century, and one even into the 20th century around responsa around access to abortion and when Jewish texts and sages say that abortion is permitted. I think most importantly, what we hopefully can take away from studying together a little bit tonight is that the Jewish view around access to abortion differs from what is often talked about as kind of the religious view on abortion. And so I think we, as Jews, and those who identify as part of the Jewish community, have a responsibility to talk about access to abortion, to talk about reproductive justice, and to stand side by side with marginalized communities who are really in need of this kind of access to reproductive care. And I think that's hugely important. And it says in the Talmud that silence is consent. So this idea that even if this issue is important to us, and we think it's important to us, that by being silent about it, we aren't actually showing that we care. So the way that we can show our support and help others who maybe have less access than many of us do here in this room is by using our voice and standing alongside others who are in need of support and care. Thank you so much for following along with me. And again, I hope if you have any questions or want to talk about this further, I am open and available. So with that, we will turn to our concluding prayers. On page 282, you may rise in body or spirit for the Aleinu.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסד ארץ, ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל, ושכינת עוזו בגובה מרומים, הוא אלוהינו אין עוד, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא.
Page 287.
ונאמר וחיה אדוני
מלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד. Page 293. Our thoughts turn to those who have departed this earth, our own loved ones, those whom our friends and neighbors have lost, the martyrs of our people whose graves are unmarked, and those of every race and nation whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. As we remember them, we meditate on the meaning of love and loss, of life and death. We think of our loved ones whom death has recently taken from us, those who died at this season in years past, and those with whom we have drawn into our hearts with our own. The Sukkot Shalom community remembers Alexander Sanders, Ira Khan, Sylvia T. Letterman, Aaron Epstein, Ben Ehrenberg, Edith R. Hall, Helene M. Krensky, Claire Phrases, the Honorable Judge Alan Greiman, Louise Pierce, Ruth Kaplan, Melvin Herbert Wolfson, Estelle Schiller, Alice Stern Fingerhut, Eli Fishman, Monty Levinson, Reverend David Smith Van Brackle. We'll turn to page 294 as we recite together the word of Mourner's Kaddish, Kaddish Tom. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shmei Rabba, B'alma divarach yurtei v'yamlich malchutei, B'chayechon u'vyomechon u'v'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael, Ba'agala u'vizman kariv v'imru Amen. Yehei shmei Rabba mevarach le'olam u'mei alamaya, Barach v'yishabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitrama v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalel, shmei dekudasha b'rechu, le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, damiram be'ama v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Osei shalom b'mamav, hu ya'aseh shalom, Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Zichronam livracha, may their memories be an abiding blessing.
Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen.
You may be seated if you would like. We'll do Kiddush and Motzi.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. On March 3rd, I hope you will circle in your calendar that Shabbat evening at 6:30 service when our choir will be rejoining us again to offer their voices to our Shabbat service. So again, March 3rd at 6:30, do plan to join us. Am I forgetting anything? No? Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
Lovely to see
Shalom.
everybody. Let's end our evening with a brief nigun, a brief Yai Lai Lai melody. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Yai Lai 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 Lai, 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 Yai Lai 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 Lai.
Shabbat Shalom. We hope you'll join us for a little oneg in the foyer.
Shabbat Shalom.